This week on Quality Digest Live, can a product be too reliable? Plus, improving measurement technology is critical to the advancement of manufacturing in the United States, but maybe having the right people to use that equipment is even more important. That and more when we come back.
Today's episode of Quality Digest Live is sponsored by East Coast Metrology, your industry leader in high-accuracy 3D metrology services.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for July 24th, 2015. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief for Quality Digest. Our publisher, Mike Richmond, is on vacation. Again, where's the guy go? A major automaker came to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory recently, wanting to better understand battery degradation. So after many months of intense collaborative research with a Berkeley Lab battery scientist, the company gleaned some important insights into the conditions that may lead to battery failure. Again, another large car company wanted to find new materials that would yield longer-lasting vehicle batteries. An ongoing scientific investigation with a Berkeley Lab battery researcher may lead to a next-generation battery. So until a couple years ago, these kinds of public-private collaborations were pretty few and far between. And the main reason was that national labs were, let's say, somewhat difficult to work with. It was hard to make contact with the right person, and once contact was made, it could take maybe months to hammer out all the paperwork for any kind of joint research. But now, as it seeks to accelerate innovation leading to a breakthrough battery technology, Berkeley Lab's battery group has made industry engagement a top priority. According to battery scientist Venkat Srinivasan, it's completely possible that Berkeley Lab, working alone, will make a spectacular discovery enabling a cost-effective electric vehicle that can go 300 miles on a single charge. But that discovery in the lab will translate to real-world impact much faster only if they work with materials companies, battery companies, and car companies and understand the challenges they face. The Berkeley Lab Battery Group, which includes scientists working on vehicle batteries, grid storage batteries, and reversible fuel cells, now offers several ways for companies to collaborate with its scientists or use its world-class scientific facilities. The mechanisms are detailed in a new website, energystorage.lbl.gov. energystorage.lbl.gov, LBL for Lawrence Berkeley Lab. As another part of the industry outreach, Berkeley Lab scientists will hold a series of workshops for battery designers next year. Of particular interest to startup battery companies may be a program supported by the Department of Energy's Tech to Market initiative. Startups would be able to work with Berkeley Lab scientists on a simple proof of concept experiment without incurring any cost and with streamlined paperwork. Industry and national lab collaboration, it makes a lot of sense. It's one thing to develop products within the higher echelons of academia or scientific institutes or labs. It is another thing to do that development in such a way that it meets the needs of the real world. If you think about it, developing technologies within lab conditions and assumptions are one thing, but real life has a way of turning all this assumptions on their heads. So this is really a good move. This kind of collaboration, as it's intended, should speed up moving innovation from academia and labs into the real world with much less hassle and also a lot more accurately in terms of errors and do-overs than it has in the past. So good stuff, Lawrence Berkeley. Okay, let's talk about supply chain. Big topic. Well, have you heard of the California Transparency in Supply Chains Act? If you are a California manufacturer and your supply chain is international, you should know about it. It was signed into law in 2010, and having taken place in 2012, the Act aims to push manufacturers and retailers to provide information to their customers about their efforts, the company's efforts, to eliminate slavery and human trafficking from their supply chains. It is also intended to educate consumers on how to investigate whether the goods they purchase are responsibly sourced. In his article, Does the California Transparency in Supply Chains Act Affect You?, author John Nigel points out that the law has forced many manufacturers to be open about their products and supply chains. And in an offline interview with me, Nigel told me that the reason he wrote this article is that even though it has been 3 years since the law took effect, there are still companies whose supply chains reach into areas where trafficking is a problem, who either aren't aware of the law or who haven't complied with its reporting requirements. In fact, this is the 24th. Just this morning, there was a news item that Thailand state prosecutors are pressing charges against more than 100 people, including an army general, in a human trafficking bust. So human trafficking is a big deal, and customers want to know about it. And California, with this Transparency Act, is really trying to bring all this to the fore so that customers can put pressure indirectly on companies to make sure that their suppliers are on the up and up in terms of who they're dealing with. So customers want to know if your company is watching out for this, and the Transparency Supply Chains Act is really intended to do that. So how do you know if your company is affected, and what can you do to make sure that you comply? Well, there's kind of if you're in California, there's kind of a three-step, 3 questions that you have to ask yourself. First, are you a retail seller or manufacturer? Second, does your company do business in California? And finally, does your company have annual receipts greater than $100 million? If you answered yes to all of the above, you are required to disclose certain information to consumers. Like what? Well, you must show that your supply chains have been evaluated to verify the risk of suppliers employing slave labor or engaging in human trafficking. You must also disclose this information if this verification was conducted by a third party. Second, have you carried out factory audits to determine if suppliers are compliant with the company's standards for trafficking and slave labor? Third, you must show that you require direct suppliers to certify that materials used to manufacture your company's products meet the laws concerning trafficking and slave labor in the countries in which the company does business. Fourth, you must maintain internal standards and procedures for employees or contractors that fail to meet the company standards regarding trafficking and slavery. Fifth, you must provide training related to slavery and human trafficking for employees and managers responsible for supply chain management. So all of this is really geared toward a very comprehensive look at the supply chain. And so the transparency part of it, well, all this information must be displayed on the company's website with a, as they say, conspicuous and easily understood link. It can't be buried. Your company doesn't have a website? Well, your company must provide consumers with a written disclosure within 30 days of any request. So if this new legislation does affect you, how can you make sure that you're compliant? The answer is quite similar to ensuring that your company is socially compliant in general. You audit your suppliers to verify the absence of slave labor and human trafficking in your supply chain. Professional firms can visit your suppliers and carry out audits specifically tailored to look for these types of things. As part of a comprehensive program, a qualified independent auditor can visit your suppliers and determine whether factories are using forced labor, slave labor, or if they are engaged in human trafficking. And here are a number of steps that you and your auditing partner must take to determine if your suppliers meet standards set by local laws and your own company, says Nigel. First, you'll need to provide your auditing partner relevant contact information and the address of the factory. Remember, this is an on-site audit they're going to do. Next, once an audit has been scheduled, your professional auditor should have some specific procedures in place for carrying out their auditing service. First of all, obviously an opening meeting that's going to set the groundwork. This is pretty standard for any kind of factory audit. And here's where we get into the nitty-gritty. First of all, a factory tour. The auditor should be walked through the factory, the dormitory, and other facilities to view general conditions of the work areas and living spaces. Next, there should be an interview of management representatives. Management should respond to questions related to forced labor, slave labor, hiring practices, personal documentation of staff, and other areas that might indicate the factory's general labor policy. While not only management, but this is a good one, they should be interviewing employees. Randomly chosen employees should be selected to complete an interview questionnaire. So if you think about that, you're talking to the management, but then you're also going out and randomly selecting employees. They're not cherry-picked by management, randomly selecting employees so that you can talk to them. That's going to give you an idea of what's really going on if management is trying to be a little obscure about their hiring practices. Obviously, a document review, want to look at all the documents, and then a concluding meeting where the auditor meets with factory management once more to discuss the findings of the audit. Management then collaborates with the auditor to draft a corrective action plan if needed. After all this, then there is a certification body who will issue a report and a rating for that supplier. So the bottom line, California has deemed it a right of the public to know whether slave labor is used in the manufacturing of the products they consume. The best way for you to be certain that your company is transparent about your supply chain is by carrying out an audit. And if you kind of look at what's really going on with this, is the goal is that the consumer puts pressure on the manufacturer. We see a lot of this going on in many different areas. Well, rather than just trying to legislate something, which has its place, is if you can get consumers to call out a company saying, hey, you know, I'm not seeing any information on your website, if you're in California, that has to do with your supply chain and whether you are certified that you have checked your supply chain for human trafficking or slave labor and that sort of thing. If the consumers put pressure on the manufacturers, who then put pressure on their supply chain, that's really going to be one way to kind of weed out this type of thing going on. It's really kind of a bottom-up, a grassroots method of driving this kind of cleanup in the industry. All right. Enough of that. What happens when a product lasts too long? That's the question posed by author Fred Schenkelberg in his article, Can a Product Have Perfect Reliability? When it comes to product longevity or reliability, just how long is good enough? Every product is different, right? And our ability to define what's long enough is fraught with uncertainty, writes Schenkelberg. If something wears out or fails too early, your customers are going to go elsewhere. They're going to be dissatisfied with your product. If it lasts too long, they won't need to come back, right? They don't need to buy anything. If your product lasts forever, you're going to sell it once to that customer, and that's going to be it. And of course, that translates to lost sales. And yet, the question still remains then, how long is good enough? We've all heard the term built-in obsolescence, and usually this is used in a derogatory way. You know, yeah, they build things to fail so that we have to buy more. In reality, I'm not sure any company really deliberately designs products to fail. More likely, what's going on is they design to a price point. The higher the price point, the better the components, the tighter the tolerances, the more robust, hopefully, the design, and the longer the longevity. The lower the price point, well, you're going to use cheaper components. It may not last as long. But even if we could design a reasonably priced product that lasted a really long time, would that be a good thing? I mean, you could argue that the customer might love that. Well, yeah, but in the short, and you would love it in the short term, but maybe this is not so good in the long term. I mean, think about it from the development side. Think about, let's say, computers. Imagine if, imagine if computers and laptops lasted 15 or 20 years. You could drop them off a desk and they would survive. You could drop them in water and they would survive. The hard drives never failed. Batteries didn't overheat and burst into flames in your lap. And 1 gigabyte of memory was more than enough for the operating system and a full suite of Microsoft products and Mist. And if that was the case, you'd probably still be watching Zork on a green cathode ray tube. Anybody know what I'm talking about? No, you're not old enough then. Okay. The only reason you would buy a new computer is if you wanted a better one. But most people think about computers, they wait until their computer dies or runs slower or whatever. Then they buy a new one. If your computer lasted 15 or 20 years, there wouldn't be enough sales to drive development and innovation. So you could argue that product failure is necessary for technological advancement. You need people to keep buying, to generate money that goes into R&D, to spur innovation and come up with new products. Schenkelberg kind of talks about this. He uses a poem from Oliver Wendell Holmes, which is really, really fun. It's the One Horse Shay. Some of you may be familiar about it. But Schenkelberg writes that back in the day, if all carriages, horse-drawn carriages, were built to such high standards that they lasted forever and worked for a very long time, would new designs and features have been invented? Maybe new features would slowly evolve the design, but if all they were doing was making the basic functions better, there would be little need to improve the design. There certainly would be no shopping for a new carriage when the old one broke down too often. So from a development point of view, this is a bad thing. You limit the market and profits when you make a product that guarantees customers won't ever need to come back to buy another one. So it brings us right back to that question again. How long is good enough? It's rare that we design a product that's too long, says Schenkelberg. It happens, but in many cases, one or two elements of a product tend to fail first. So the trick is design products where the weakest component will last forever. Well, when we talk about how long is necessary, there's the rub. It depends on the cost of the product. Have you ever researched a product you were going to buy? I do this all the time on Amazon or Home Depot or wherever. I look at the customer ratings, and specifically, I look at the negative ratings. Do you do that? I mean, and if you do that, then you know that a certain amount of the complaints have to do with the longevity. People will complain, well, it only lasted 1 week, or it lasted 1 month, or it lasted 1 year, or I used it 5 times and it failed. And if you look at it, the complaints tend to be in direct proportion to the cost of the product, or the longevity of the complaints tends to be in direct proportion to the cost of the product. The higher the cost, the longer people expect it to last. So as an example, many of your do-it-yourselfers out there know that there is a national big box store that sells nothing but really cheap tools. That's all they sell is tools, so you probably know who I'm talking about. In fact, most of us go to this store if we need what we call a throwaway tool. So if you go to the store and you look at the ratings on these tools, you will very often see something like this. I used the floor jack 3 times and it died, but hey, I only needed it for that one job and given the price. So people are willing to pay a low price for a product that will fail as long as it does the job, but there's that price point. As long as it's low enough and it lasts long enough, it can fall apart and people don't care. If they're paying a lot more money, they want it to last longer. So, how do you decide on how long it should last? Well, you have to base that on past experience or market research with similar products. When do people start to complain? If a bunch of customers complain when a product lasts only a year, then a year is too short. If longevity complaints drop off to nothing, let's say at 2 years or 3 years, well, then maybe 2 years or 3 years is your target for how long your product should last. The trick, as Schenkelberg points out, is finding that balance between long enough to keep the customer happy, but short enough that you don't put yourself out of business. There you go. Okay. It's time now for the latest installment of our CMSC Corner segment, where we hear about the latest news from the Society as well as other important developments in the world of portable 3D test and measurement. Mike and I were just at the Coordinate Metrology Systems Conference show, the CMSC, in Hollywood, Florida. Matter of fact, we just got back. It's a great show, as usual, if you're into high precision, large volume, 3-dimensional measurement. But the real buzz amongst the show's executive committee this year was that the CMSC, along with the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, were awarded an AMTech grant. These grants help to accelerate the growth of advanced manufacturing in the United States. They help fund industry-driven coalitions to focus on developing and executing plans to solve common technology challenges. Now, there's a lot of ramifications of this grant. I really don't want to minimize it, but the focus is largely technical. We're looking for technical advancements. However, as I think most of us know, there is more to measurement, more to anything than just the technical aspect. So we had a chance to sit down with Rena Malari, Vice Chair of the CMSC, and Ron Rode, its Executive Chair. Both are metrology specialists, measurement specialists, and both have extensive field experience in 3D metrology within the manufacturing world. And I wanted to drill down a bit with them on what they perceive as some of the greater needs in the field besides technical advancements. So what are some of what are the things that they see aside from technical advancements that they think would really improve the field? Here's that interview. Okay, so the CMSC got a grant from Amtech, and my understanding is that's more kind of technically oriented, and I'm reading here, the goal of that grant is to identify and prioritize the technology needs of the aerospace, defense, energy, and other industries that manufacture large-scale, high-accuracy parts and products. So basically, they're looking at the technology end of it. So from your experience in the field, is it really all technology issues, or is there something else going on?
Rena?
Yeah, well,
ladies first.
Thank you, Ron. Well, what I see in the field is as we're moving towards more high tolerance parts, what they're asking for is also high tolerance measurements to go with those parts. You've got to have the operators to work the equipment. So now we're coming back to a human issue. Where are we going to get the operators who are qualified to go ahead and run these measurement systems? These systems are highly technical. They do have lots of software that run them. They can be automated, but still it takes a level of expertise to be the initial one to set up that first measurement. So the qualifications of these people and the skills are what I'm finding are hard to find in the field. So as we move towards high technology, we also need to bring along the operators who operate this equipment. So for me, it becomes more of a training issue again in personnel, and more so even retaining these employees. Ron, your experience?
A lot of what I see, and I've done a lot of training over the years, one of the issues that it's repetitive, and I can tell you when it's going to happen every time I go into a plant. They finally get the money to buy some training, and most of the time, all of a sudden, they get 3, 4, 5 days of training. Management thinks, we've got some pros on hand now. Well, now they've just become dangerous. You're going to turn them loose. They're not sure. They don't have that nice, warm fuzzy about what they do. And they're going to march on, and they're going to put out data. They're going to put out information because they're being forced to. They got somebody ramrodding behind them, hey, we got to get this done, this done, this done, and this done. Well, the first time they make a fatal error on a measurement, and it costs them hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, all of a sudden managers come back saying, why? Why? It's the technology, it's improving so fast, and they're able to get so much more accuracy, but like Rena was stating, if you don't have an operator that understands, not just can run software, we're finding software now is not an issue anymore. People can run the software, it's easy. It's applying the software and applying a method that without a doubt you can produce data that one is repeatable and is trustworthy and is accurate. So when you turn it in, it's good.
Well, I'm hearing actually a couple different things. Rena mentioned the skill set of the operators, but I also heard you say something along the lines that management may not understand what it takes for these measurements to be accomplished, that they're just asking for something and how quickly can it be delivered.
Bigger, better, faster.
Okay.
Sure, they've got massive parts assemblies that they want. Parts are made all over the globe now. Everybody's going to a tighter tolerance. And again, if you don't have an operator that has some experience that can get in and knows, again, how to apply the equipment, how to go in and get the right data, or they don't understand that you can't be faster when they don't have the experience.
Right.
It's a double-edged sword, and it just takes some time.
A lot of times management will feel that you've gone through the training class, and like Ron said, by the end of that training class, you should be an expert at running that piece of equipment. What they're failing to realize is the experience that sometimes needs to go along with that training also. You take your days of training, then you go out in the field and you work it, but you need to be under the umbrella of perhaps a more experienced operator. The guys and gals out in the field field, I'll do a great job. I'm not saying anything about that. But if they don't know what to look for, and of course in the, let's say, week, it's very rarely that that I've been somewhere for 2 weeks and trained the same people for 2 weeks, okay? So really they just get that 3 days to 5 days of training and are sent out. So again, being under the umbrella of maybe an experienced metrologist, what they used to call that in the industry when you came in as not quite an intern, an apprentice.
An apprenticeship
There we
program.
go.
Right.
That seems to be lacking in our industry, really.
Well, and that, and I know we were going to get to this in a little bit, but since you brought up kind of the training, there isn't a whole lot of knowledge transfer going on for metrologists today, is there?
The charter of the CMS is transfer of knowledge. Their whole mission is to be able to bring in people on all skill sets and be able to get together and take the knowledge they have and pass it on. Because what you have in some of these people, 20, 30, 40 years of experience, and somebody just now coming in that hasn't seen the growth of all these different systems, and they don't understand just the big picture yet. And that's what the CMSC is about, bringing these people in, and they're all in the pool together, and the knowledge just gets absorbed.
Does there need to be some sort of training or PR effort for management so that they understand that you can't just hop out onto Angie's list and look for a skilled metrologist?
I don't think it quite grasps the complexity of the metrology world. I mean, how many universities have 4-year metrology degrees?
Right.
Where are you gonna,
Right.
you can go to some universities and get a little piece here, a little piece there. If you have an engineering background, it's a great help. But when it comes to metrology, on the scale that we practice, it's basically just being mentored.
Mentoring.
It's standing under somebody for years, and sometimes making your own mistakes along the way.
When you're out in the field working with young metrologists, the young men and women that are just entering the field, are they aware of their lack of knowledge? Or are they coming to you and asking you, where can I gain more knowledge? How can I improve my skills?
Oftentimes we do. We get asked where they can go take training classes, and as Ron had said, you just can't find a university. Now, let me step back. Not quite in universities. There are some that are in University of North Charlotte, and some other places. For example, ECM is doing a class for our level 1 certification. It's at least level 1 is a base knowledge, so it's not really particular to any kind of equipment. Perhaps maybe even some CMM operators may be able to answer most of those questions. So they're not really focused on a particular piece of equipment, but the base knowledge in general. But once you start getting out and working with the equipment, it does become more of an on-the-job training. You can get training from the manufacturer of the equipment also, but like we were talking about, it really depends on how are you going to apply that equipment. Are you doing reverse engineering? Are you doing inspection? Are you doing assembly with measurements? So even though you're a metrologist, you then have to branch off into these other venues, because if you're doing reverse engineering, now you're talking about a lot of CAD work and knowledge on how that works. If you're talking about inspection, now you just work, you're concerned about the part and reading your GD&T and interpreting these requirements. If you're working in, let's say, metrology guided assembly, well, now you've got to understand the whole assembly sequence and maybe how, one tooling hole will affect the downstream events if that tooling hole is too large or not quite in place. So you start with this base knowledge of metrology, and then you kind of have to grow, and maybe they're not an engineer, they're operators, but they're expected to operate on the level of engineers and yet bring that down to the factory floor also. So it really is a complex position for these people. Right. Most of them are not just floor operators, but they have to delve between the engineering and the floor, and then interacting with management, because they just bought you this high-dollar piece of equipment, right?
And you've got money out of it.
Yes.
Quickly.
So they want to see, that's right, they want to see their ROI. So they buy you something new and hand it to you, and you've got to be able to get some results out for them. So it's a kind of a different realm. You know, we talked about you can't just pick up the phone and say, Angie's List, find me a metrologist,
Right.
you know. When you're looking for an electrician, you look for a licensed electrician. So that's where we kind of starting to go with this certification testing. We're going slowly but surely, you know, and we've got level 1 down. Ron's been working very heavily on the committee. They've done level 2, which is portable arms, and this year they are testing out the pilot program for laser trackers. And
Okay, well, just real quick as we wrap up here, really quickly, if you could wave a magic wand and get something that would most help the field of large-scale, high-precision metrology, what would that be?
The understanding of what close tolerance really is, where it needs to be applied, and the factors that dictate what you can and cannot realistically expect.
And Rena?
I was going to say probably the respect of the people in your manufacturing community. Okay. For some reason here in the U.S., for example, just like surveyors in Europe, they are very highly regarded skill set. Over here, you know, people, oh, I have to pay $500 to get my land surveyed. Oh my God. You know, okay, but think about what that piece of paper does. It designates your boundaries. That's a very important thing. Just like in high precision measurement, the people that derive those measurements and tell you that define your part or your assembly, you have to earn their respect too, or they should be, you know, respected by the community.
Okay. Well, Rena and Ron, thanks for joining me this morning.
Thank you
Always
very
a
much.
pleasure, Dirk.
Yes.
Thank you.
And once again, thanks Rena and Ron for sitting down with me at the CMSC show there. Yeah, as they point out, you know, technology is important. We've always got to be pushing the limits of technology to keep advancing. But in the end, it's people who use the technology, and we've got to be concentrating on them as well. So once again, guys, thanks a lot. Well, that is our show this week, but before we go, I would like to thank our sponsor, East Coast Metrology, your industry leader in high-accuracy 3D metrology services. ECM combines cutting-edge technology using laser trackers, laser scanners, portable arms, and CMMs with professional competency. Their highly trained engineering team consistently delivers quality service solutions that are innovative and industry-proven, giving their customers the competitive edge they need. Well, that's it for today. Thanks all of you for joining us, and I will see you with the next QDL. So long.
Four, three, two, one, fire.